Alrighty, just under the truck, I'm bolting the T18 transmission, and these two guys right here are like a loose 18, loose 19, loose 18, so I'm going to bust these off. And then these U-joints, or these U-bolts for the drive shaft here, universal joint, I don't know what they're called. These are 13 mils right here. Obviously you're going to want some means of securing the transmission, so I actually happen to have a transmission jack that I haven't used in like 4 years, but it's going to get used again. That's holding the transmission, so when I unbolt that, it doesn't just all fall down on my face, or at least hopefully not. As for that shifter, I'm not sure how that comes off. It looks like, I'm guessing it's just going to slide on and off, so we'll see. I mean, judging by how the T19 looks here, I think this is a little different, but maybe that circular shift linkage just slides right on off that, so we'll see. Oh, and I can't believe I almost forgot, but you got to disconnect your reverse switch and your speedometer cable. It looks like it's got a little slack in it, so actually I'm gonna jack this up, get those little posts out of the cross member, and get it more in the engine bay here so I have easier access at the drive wire and the reverse switch. I actually scratched that. I can't do that because I got to drop it down to get the linkage out, but I can't get the linkage out because I can't drop it down, so I'll just have to struggle underneath the truck to get those two, but that's okay. Alrighty, so here's where the cable goes into the transmission. That bolt there is just an 11 mil. One thing I would advise on doing before pulling that I'm kind of already too late for is dropping the trans fluid out of this, but I guess I'll just have to roll around in gear oil if it spills. Alrighty, so I got that top little hat part unscrewed. It just screws onto that collar there. And that retains that little pin in the corner. So that pin is supposed to just walk out. You just got to pull up and down on the transmission and get a magnet on that pin, and it should just ease on out. If you do it wrong here, that pin can actually fall in the transmission, and then you're going to have a bad time. May I add, there's a little relief up here, and I just stuck my Phillips in there and I instantly relieved that pin out. And now I just got some up and downward tension on that pin, so it's stuck again. But just be super careful when you're removing this pin. You know, upon draining the oil and spilling it all over my sidewalk, I saw a whole plethora of metal chunks falling out of it, and she does not disappoint. I mean, that is just all that boost grime you see there is just gear chunks. Well, granted, that could be just from over the years, but it just never got turned sideways, or someone never stuck their finger in there to get it all out. But I mean, the bottom of this, it's just all grimy, but it still drives great, so screw it. You know, just sticking the magnet in there for like 3 seconds, and that's what came out. And it just keeps getting worse. You know, maybe I will use that T19. I know this T18 what shifted well, but that T19 sounding a little bit more appetizing now. Alrighty, so next thing we got to do is swap over the diesel radiator onto the Bullnose core support. So this is a gas radiator, this is a diesel radiator. Obviously the diesel one is a lot bigger. So what you have to do is on the bottom of the, what do you call it? I'll walk you through it. The Bricknose core support, you just drill out the spot welds on there, and you drill them out on the Bullnose, and then they just swap on over, like such. And I don't have experience with this, but I've read it enough in Facebook groups to know that it causes people hernias. Gasser radiators will not keep an IDI cool for long or on heavy loads. So this is definitely something you want to do, because it would suck if you put the whole thing together and then it just overheats and then you blow your head gaskets and then it's got to all come out anyways. Ask me how I know. So first order of business on the this is the Bricknose right here. Disconnect this center brace. Well, it's going to be a painful process, but pretty much I'm just going to drill out all the spot welds and connect this whole little channel here so I can insert it into there I checked in between these two little I-beam spaces or whatever, and they line up perfectly with those right there. So I know in terms of fitment, I can get it to slide in perfectly and then just weld them. This might require some cutting, but we'll see. So what I'm going to do here to make things simpler is this big old plate right here. I'm just going to cut it from back here up to this line here, and then that should free it up from this area right here. And to clarify, the reason I'm doing it that way is because this is when you start to get into the radiator support areas. And I don't want to take this one and bring it over to here, because this is already, I know this isn't a good spot. You know, when you start cutting and moving things, even the 1/16 of an inch can screw everything up. So that's why I'm going about it that way. And pretty much everything to the right of my hand there is what's going to be changed, and everything there is going to be original. And like that, I'm already halfway done. And here it is. A lot of spot welding and drilling, but I'd say this only took me about an hour. So you're going to find the majority of your spot welds are going to be on the back side here, as well as on the side. One thing that really helps is to take a grinder and clean off the metal on the surface, like I did here. And it really exposes a lot of the spot welds. Over here, it looks like I had to drill out a couple on the bottom too. But yep, more of the same story. And not all of these were holes I drilled. Some of these holes, like these, were already here. But there and there, front and sides. And then if I remember correctly, this is where the radiator actually mounts on in. I'm no historian, but I was thinking, oh, well, I'm gonna need to drill this out bigger to fit the diesel nozzle, but upon looking at the hole here, I think that could fit a diesel nozzle just fine. Just disregard that. Fire department didn't plan on this being diesel swap, but I think this was made back when people had more common sense and they didn't have to raise the size of the nozzles. Time to swap over the radiator supports. I still got to drill these out. Now I'm just taking off the center radiator brace. That's a 10 mil, and I'm also just disconnecting it from the parts up there. This will stay. At least I'm pretty sure. At least that's how it works with this flavor. Right here, these are the radiator mounts for the gas radiator. The diesel radiator is actually, the mounts are integrated into that lower hoop there. So these guys I'm going to pop out. These are 8 mils right here. Actually, with a more careful thought process here, this is from the diesel radiator. And all I'm going to do is take that stuff off on the top, take the center bracket out, and then after I cut this loop out, bolt this in place, and then this should line up with the bottom of the loop over there. And even if it's a little off, you got a little play here. Now there's really a few ways to go about this, but what I'm going to try first here is just to cut out these bottom parts right here and see if I can't just slide these two beams right in between there. See if it'll just kind of press fit in there, and then we'll go from there. But still, one problem with this is this opening is a lot less smaller. You could tell here. So I'm going to have to just cut that open at 1.2. It kind of acts as a shroud, but now that we got a bigger radiator, we don't need all that extra metal there. And that might affect some grill mounting holes, but we'll figure something out. I'm not worried. And there we had it. My idea worked. I had to cut out a little bit on the bottom there, but ultimately it just slid right on in. The old bottom, it's right over there. And this is going to be kind of a cut and play and tack weld type deal, because I'm actually not going to fully even tack these in until I get everything in the truck, because judging where this is mounted, the radiator fan shroud actually bolts to that, and if this radiator is just a little low or a little high, that fan's just going to eat up that shroud. So it's something I'm actually going to mock up when it's in the truck. But real simple. As you can see, it just, oh, it's kind of a press fit right now, but I just dropped it right in those channels there, and it lined up pretty nicely. And I'll have to still cut off these big rectangles, but that's a problem for another day. There's a million ways you can go about this. I think this is the easiest, but just get creative. A few problems I could see about doing it this way is it might be a little bit more difficult to get these guys in. So these guys sat on top here, but now that there's going to be metal blocking it, that can make it a little bit more difficult. Also, obviously, it's kind of a press fit, so there'll be a little bit of an open area here, so that could be an area for moisture and junk to get trapped. I'll see how I feel about it once I actually get it all together, but honestly, I'm not that worried about it. Another thing I'd like to touch up on is the actual, what I meant earlier is that this shroud actually bolts up to the radiator. So this shroud doesn't bolt up to the radiator support like I said, but obviously the radiator bolts up to the support. And if the radiator is just a little too high or a little too low, the engine in the truck isn't going to move with it. And that fan, that mechanical fan could eat this up. Well, okay, it's a clutch fan. But then obviously that clutch fan is bound up on this. It's not going to spin. So then there goes like half your cooling. But it is very imperative where this is mounted. And obviously, you know, you could play with this and where this is mounted too. But I'm just going to try and do it right the third time and get something real nice. One little trick that might help gauge depth here is actually use the diesel center support brace and just set it right on in here and actually see if it lines right on up. Obviously I have a lot more ways to go in terms of pressing this in, but that might help you also set your depths and how deep this radiator should be. I don't have this adjusted all the way up yet, but I have the radiator in here and mocked up, and you could tell that top clearance may or may not be an issue for the cap. You can tell they actually cut out a little recess for it there. So you could tell that this is pretty much straight along the ways here versus when you look at the diesel support, it's actually got a little C-notch there, so that might need some modifying too. But as we go on here, another thing I noticed is this radiator actually wasn't nearly as wide as I thought. I still needed to cut out those bottom parts to get that bottom piece off. If I would have known better, I would have drilled out the spot welds, but that's okay. So it looks like this rad support here obviously doesn't have anywhere for these to bolt up. So there I'm going to have to get creative too. I'll probably just drill some holes through this metal on the front here. I'm glad I left it. And maybe if I need to push this back a little bit, put some spacers in here, stack some nuts on a screw, and bolt it on that way. But besides that, this is going pretty smoothly. So yeah. Obviously, one thing to be worried about is if I have this a little bit too listed, you know, like trophy truck style, is the shroud gonna hit the mechanical fan or clutch fan? I don't know, but there's fine tweaking and adjustery that needs to be done. This is obviously custom. So one of the first orders of business I'm gonna do in order to close this gap here, as you can tell, is I'm going to need to trim these little corner pieces here because these guys start to get a little thick, and in order to make that actually slide up more, I'm going to have to clearance that. So we'll see how that goes. Shouldn't really affect the mountability of this. At least I hope it doesn't. If not, welder, grinder will find a way. So a good way to figure out how much distance you need to cut is just put that on the bottom there and just measure how far. So when I measured it, holding it and whatnot, I was at about 5 inches. So I'm going to cut up 5 more inches on the sides where those humps are hitting and see if that can bring up this whole thing more and get it to bolt up. So when I say 5 more inches, I mean from the bottom here to about right there. Then I'll let this hump slide up more. You might find it's a little tough to push in because it starts to get tight on those rails, so it's more of a press fit. But now these gaps line up pretty well. That's where those little arches in the corners were. And if you put this right in the middle, voila, lines up. Next up, to mock up the radiator. So one thing I noticed with these is not all the holes exactly line up, meaning that This diesel one might confront the gasser. It does confront the holes on top a little bit, but honestly, that's the least of my worries. I could just drill these out bigger or something and it'll be fine, so I'm not too worried about that. But just some food for thought when you're doing this and you notice something's a little off. So on the Bullnoses, their hoods, or the Bricknoses, kind of go up more, and their radiator actually comes over the shroud here, versus the Bullnoses, their radiator is actually flush with the shroud. So we'll see how this fitment works here, and I'm just going to go set it on the truck and mock it up with that fender line. So here's our new issue. So as I'm pushing this back, this lower radiator support is hitting right where the sway bar actually mounts to the frame. So I measured this and I compared it to the U-Haul, and the U-Haul, or the Bricknose I should say, has a completely, their sway bar is similar, but goes forward a lot more. Actually up to here, it was like only 3.5 inches back versus like this is 8 3/4 back. But then that would allow me to clear this. So I'm gonna go have to rip the sway bar off the U-Haul, the Bricknose, and put it on the Bullnose here, because back here it looked the same. And then I'll be able to get that clearance for the lower rad support. And also, it's on the Bricknose. There's actually holes for the actual sway bar end links, like the Bricknoses have. However, the Bullnose here doesn't have the 2 holes in the front like the Bricknoses have, so I will have to drill 2 holes, but it should be pretty straightforward. Over here at the Bricknose, and these under here are actually loose 14s, so they're probably a standard size, but a 14 worked for me. But you could tell as compared to the Bullnose how much more farther forward this is. On the Bullnose, all the hardware is 18s. However, here, this is also an 18. So I'm just going to zap these off. They have these, Ford just really likes these big industrial clips for some reason. So that's what's holding these on, versus over on the Bricknose. If I remember correctly, it's just nuts. Yeah, definitely not a 14. Yeah, these are just some sort of 13, but then it rusts up, so it's like 13.25. Anyways, here's how it is on the Bullnose. Totally different. They don't have those C little channel boys. They have these actual brackets. So next step to remove these. Yeah, here's the 2 differences between those sway bars. You can definitely tell that the Bricknose is a lot longer. The only similarity they share, I think, is these end links, which is perfect for me because the newer truck has worse parts. You know, honestly, Ford couldn't have made that any easier to swap over. So anyways, I'm just going to put a floor jack underneath this. All I did was just bolt it to the front. My wheels are pretty straight, but just lifts right up and goes right into place. Place a little Sharpie hole in each one, drill out the holes and bolt it on up. And you could tell where the old one was, and it's just like that on the Bricknose as well. So if for whatever reason you need to put a Bullnose sway bar in a Bricknose, now you know. There it is with the radiator support, with the radiator just loosely sitting in there. And look at that. Beautiful. But putting a pin in that, because I kind of saw this coming. That radiator just doesn't clear the fender levels, so gonna have to see what I'm gonna have to do about that. I might try and put the hood on and just see if it'll clear, but otherwise it looks like I got enough room underneath here. I might just so this radiator sits has like little tongs on the side, and then on the side of the support just has like a bar that sticks out, and it rests on that. So I might cut and push those down a little bit, and that might buy me, this little gap here might buy me just enough hood clearance to actually clear the hood without any extensive modifications, because so far this has been really easy. Ignore that. and I just want to keep it that way. So I set the hood on to mock it up, and obviously the hood sinks in the fenders a little bit because I don't have the stops on the corners, but that is some super close fitment. I wonder if I can see that. That is not touching the hood, but is super close to. And I actually don't have the spacer shims underneath these yet because there was like a spacer shim there. I don't know if that's a factory option or not. But I might just try and leave this be, install it as is, and see if everything lines up fine. And if it does, just leave it. Otherwise, like I said, I might have to just cut the tabs in the corners and drop the radiator a little bit. But surprisingly, so far, with the hood dropped down a little bit, it fits. So I guess we'll see what happens. Alrighty, y'all. I got a lot done today, but right now I just put the radiator support on and I'm just kind of mocking things up. I actually took the spacers out, and so far it actually fits pretty nice. I had to jack up the hood a little bit, but no real fitment issues. You could tell on the driver's side it's a little lower, but I can put some spacers in there, but this just lets me know that my rad support as is clears, and I can weld it to the upper rad support. I went underneath here and I'm shaking the radiator, and it is not, I just have it temporarily secured. It is not hitting the hood, so I think we're good here. Yeah, and you actually get a lot of room to play with this fan. I thought fighting the shroud would be an absolute clearance nightmare, but it's not. Now, as for mounting up this radiator to this actual rad support, because they were two different designs, I think what I'm going to do is use these holes here and drill a hole through here because they line up, and then just use some bolts to hold it on in together. Design may vary, but I think that's what I'm going to go for because it looks like, yeah, it's hard to tell, but I'm pretty sure that lines up. I'll let y'all know what I do. Yeah, change of plans. That hole doesn't line up, but I'll get creative and figure something out. This is the least of my worries. This will be easy to figure out. So when I take this back out to paint it and cut it and weld it, I'm gonna actually, I just took a Sharpie and I marked at the bottom here, right where the old rad support and the bottom rad support, remember how that kind of just slides in? I'm gonna cut that and weld it there so I don't have all this extra material here, because I feel like over the years, because this isn't exactly tight, as you guys can tell right there, gunk and whatnot can build up in there. I live on a gravel road, and moisture could rot this on out, and I want this to last long term, so I'm gonna cut it and weld it and do it the right way. And like I said, that middle rad support gusset thingamabobber I-beam is such a great thing for reference, because I know that I cannot cut this any shorter or any longer than it needs to be, and even if I somehow do, you got a little bit of play right here. And these are with bushings that are sacked out, and there's not even spacers in there, so I know clearance there will not be a problem. So like I said, this is a great reference, and pretty much all it's going to do is teeter back and forth, but even if you mess up, it wouldn't be too hard of a fix. Something worth noting when you're tightening and loosening these headlight surround thingies, be careful, because I was pushing too tight here and unfortunately it broke the plastic off, but way she goes. It's 42 years old. I'm surprised it made it this long. I'd like to add, in my personal experience, it's actually easier to put this radiator in with the rad support with it on it, but just be wary when you do that if you do it yourself, because it is heavy, so it's probably best to have a friend help you. As for the radiator mounting, I think I'll actually take a similar course of action to my last plan, but just in a different spot. So when I lay this on the ground, I'm going to paint or drill straight forward or whatever, but for these two factory mounting holes, I'm just going to run some bolts that go all the way through some all threads, and then just, maybe even I'll get fancy and just weld some nuts on here, yeah. And so it just screws in and out. And this came with, in the U-Haul, an actual cushiony pad that went right here, and I feel like I might be able to just put that right here as well, so when the radiator is pressed up against the cowl here, it's not really hurting it. Otherwise, you know, I could do something simple with any piece of rubber, but the nice part is there's a part that was actually made for it, so I might as well use it if I find it. And as for these battery tray supports, I'm a little confused at what I'm going to do, at least on the passenger side here. Some of the spot welds coincidentally line up with those holes, but it's kind of hard to tell if there's any factory holes I really got to work with, as y'all can see there, if my camera focuses. Okay, yeah, this is what I get for using a smartphone. But luckily over here on the driver's side, it's also a pain to get lined up, but at least there's actual holes already. It looks like I only got one threadable boil right there, but and on the bottom I just have the bolt sitting there. But looks like I'll be okay here on the driver's side, but that is something worth noting, because if you don't do that, this fender might flop around and whatnot when you're hitting bumps on the road, and that's just no bueno. I know, I'm almost done. So actually here on the, if I can line it up right, passenger side, you do have a hole that you can work with. That one nut right there, I couldn't get it to work earlier because this pressed in piece of the old lower supports there, but once I cut that out, that should be able to go right on through. So perfect. Don't even really need to do any custom modification. It's all bolt up. This is basically a Civic, or I should say Honda's basically a Ford. I mean, this all bolted up just fine. No cutting or welding needed. Hey y'all, it's the next day. Just got the lower radiator cradle off the front rad support there, and I'm just gonna go up to this. I got her chalked up in the hoist and just cut her on off right there and there, then weld it on in. So I just mocked up the radiator after the welds. I just wanted to make sure it was lined up enough, and yep, that fitment seems about right. I remember it being a little bit slanted to the right, so that'll work just fine. Now I'm just going to finish up welding this, get it nice and supported. After that, drill some holes so the radiator can actually mount fine, and then sand off that rust, paint it, and get it in that truck, and hopefully I'll have it running within the next couple days here. So yeah, luckily a Sharpie fits just perfectly, so I'm just setting it in the hole there, and then I'm just pointing it down and making a little X marks the spot. Okay, I got the bolts threaded on in, nuts welded as you could tell. I'm gonna put some washers on those, but it's holding the radiator just fine. I'm gonna have to cut this to size. I couldn't find the right size bolt, so I had to make do. These are all just bolts I had sitting around in my bolt drawer. One thing I recommend is when you're welding this, thread the bolt into the nut and then let it sit there and then weld it, because then basically it won't let the nut oval out or anything. It'll keep it the right size. It might be a little tight coming out, but at least it'll keep the nut from shrinking too much on you or expanding and whatnot. But there you are. So I just did a couple tacks because this is some thin sheet metal here, and it actually warped it a little bit here, which kind of sucks because when I'm screwing this in and out, it kind of goes at an angle now, but it'll work. It's already overkill. So okay y'all, it's time to paint this. I'm not going to paint the whole thing because I don't have time for that, and it doesn't need it, but these bottoms here are pretty getting close to getting crusty. They're not quite full crust, but there is rust. This is fine, but these right here, definitely super important. That's where they mount to the actual frame, so I got to clean that up for sure at minimum. And when you're painting this, just make sure, if you're doing this, you don't lose your headlight springs, because that would suck to lose that. And also, since I got everything off, I might as well kind of sand this down and paint this too, just to, you know, keep on things. It's good to take care of your stuff. It's lived this long, give it another life. Just painting it at night outside. What a great idea. And there she is, just sitting to dry. I totally don't advise doing this at 10 o'clock at night while on the grass, but I've told myself for the past 2 days I'm getting this painted, and by golly, is I gonna get it painted. I didn't want to do it in here and get overspray on everything. I kind of messed up too. I only wanted to paint the bottom part. Well, the whole thing ended up getting painted. The top part, the only part on this that'll actually show has overspray on it, so it'll look goofy, but I don't care. I just wanted to stop this from rusting. I don't really care about appearances. I'm not really restoring this truck at the moment. I'm more just trying to bring it back to work, so I'm happy with it. This is Farmall red paint. Like, that clashes with that paint. I don't know what the fire department used, but it will protect the truck. It'll keep it alive. So typically I think those stickers, you know, you see at Walmart, you know, like the bald eagles and all that goofy stuff is kind of tacky. Well, I fell victim to that.